Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval roadside inn, and trust me, you're going to want to keep your boots on, your coin purse close, and your expectations buried somewhere beneath the floorboards. Picture this. It's 1347, somewhere along the road between London and Canterbury, and the sun is dropping behind the trees like a stone into a well. You've been walking since dawn, your feet are screaming, and that cluster of buildings ahead, the crooked timber frames, the sagging thatched roof, the thin ribbon of smoke curling from a hole in the wall, looks like salvation itself. But here's the reality check. You probably won't survive the night with your dignity, your health, or your belongings intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're still 50 yards from the inn when the smell hits you. A thick, complex assault on your nostrils that's part with smoke, part animal waste, part fermented grain, and part something you can't quite identify but instinctively want to avoid. The Medieval Roadside Inn isn't the charming hobbit hole tavern you've seen in movies, all glowing hearths and friendly barkeeps. It's a desperate necessity, a last resort, the only thing standing between you and spending the night in a forest where wolves, bandits, and your own hypothermia are waiting to finish you off. The building itself looks like it's held together by spite and prayer. The timber frame leans slightly to one side, not enough to condemn it, but enough to make you wonder if tonight's the night it finally gives up. The walls are wattle and daub, which is a fancy medieval term for sticks and mud, and you can see where patches have fallen away entirely, exposing the skeletal framework beneath. The thatch roof is supposed to be replaced every few years, but this one looks like it's been up there since the Crusades, dark and water-stained, with tufts of straw sticking out at odd angles like the inn itself has bedhead. There's no proper sign because most people can't read anyway. Instead, there's a weathered wooden pole jutting from the wall with a crude image of something that might be a bush, or maybe a sheep. Honestly, medieval signage leaves a lot to interpretation. This is important though because inns were legally required to display some kind of marker. In 1393, King Richard II actually passed a law requiring alehouses to hang signs so the official ale taster could find them. Yes, that was a real job, and yes, we'll come back to why that job existed and why you wouldn't want it. You push open the door, and door is generous. It's more like a collection of vertical planks held together with rusty iron bands and hope, and immediately you're hit with a wall of heat and noise that makes the outside seem peaceful by comparison. Your eyes sting from the smoke. There's no chimney, just a fire pit in the center of the room with smoke theoretically escaping through a hole in the roof, but theoretically is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Most of the smoke just hangs in the air at about head height, creating a gray haze that makes everyone look like they're already ghosts. The floor beneath your feet isn't wood. It's packed earth covered with rushes, dried grass and reeds that are supposed to absorb spills and make the place smell better. Spoiler, they don't. These rushes get replaced maybe once or twice a year if you're lucky, which means you're walking on months of accumulated beer spills, food scraps, vomit, and things we're not going to discuss while you're trying to relax. Erasmus, the famous Dutch scholar, visited England in the 1500s and complained bitterly about these floors, noting that they contained spittle, vomit, the leakage of dogs and men, ale droppings, scraps of fish, and other abominations not fit to be mentioned. And that was in a nice house. Imagine what an inn's floor was like. The ceiling is so low that anyone over 5'8" has to hunch, and you quickly learn to move carefully because the exposed beams are rough-hewn and perfectly positioned to crack your skull. Medieval people were shorter on average than we are today. Nutrition wasn't exactly a priority, but even they had to duck. These buildings were designed to conserve heat, which makes sense in a world without central heating, but it also means the air quality is somewhere between coal mine and submarine. You're standing in what's called the common room, and common is the operative word. This is where everything happens. Drinking, eating, arguing, gambling, sleeping, fighting, and occasionally dying. There's no separate dining room, no bar area, no lounge. Just one multipurpose space that serves every function except privacy and comfort. The innkeeper, a thick-set man with a beard that looks like it could harbor a small ecosystem, barely glances at you. He's seen hundreds of travelers just like you, and he's learned not to get attached because there's a decent chance you'll be dead or gone by morning. You need to negotiate your accommodation immediately because there's no such thing as a reservation system. It's first come, first served, and the best spots, which is relative because there are no actually good spots, get claimed early. You're competing with merchants, pilgrims, entertainers, soldiers, and people who might charitably be called drifters, but more accurately should be called criminals between crimes. The innkeeper will charge you based on what he thinks he can extract. There's no posted price list. If you look wealthy, you'll pay more. If you look desperate, you'll pay more. If you're a woman traveling alone, good luck. You're about to pay the most and receive the worst service because medieval gender dynamics were exactly as bad as you're imagining. The concept of the roadside inn emerged from pure necessity. Medieval Europe was crisscrossed with trade routes, pilgrimage paths, and royal roads that required maintenance by law. The Romans had built an impressive road system centuries earlier, and while many of those roads were crumbling by the medieval period, they still provided the skeleton for travel. But here's the thing. A horse can travel maybe 30 miles a day. A person on foot maybe 15 to 20 if they're determined and the weather cooperates. You can't just pop into a Marriott when you're tired. You need shelter, and you need it where the road puts you, not where you'd prefer to be. Monasteries and churches initially filled this gap, offering hospitality as a religious duty. Benedictine monks took vows that included welcoming travelers, and many monasteries maintained guest houses specifically for this purpose. It was seen as imitating Christ, who had nowhere to lay his head. But monastic hospitality had limits. They could only accommodate so many people. They had rules about who they'd accept, and frankly, some monasteries were in the middle of nowhere, which was great for contemplation but terrible for travelers. This is where secular inns stepped in, operated by people who saw an opportunity to make money from the endless stream of humanity flowing along medieval roads. The word in itself comes from the Old English, inn, meaning simply inside or lodging. By the 14th century, England alone had thousands of these establishments, ranging from tiny alehouses that might offer a corner of floor space to larger inns that could accommodate dozens of guests with relatively separate sleeping areas. The best inns were in cities or major crossroads, places where bishops, nobles, and wealthy merchants might stay. Those establishments had actual beds, separate rooms, and food that probably wouldn't kill you. But out here on the road between settlements, you get what you get, and what you get is this. The innkeeper demands payment up front. No credit, no promises, cash in hand. You fish out your coins, watching his eyes track every piece of silver. There's no official currency standardization like we have today. You might have English pennies, foreign coins from trading partners, or even pieces of silver that have been cut into halves or quarters, which is where we get the term pieces of 8. The innkeeper examines each coin suspiciously, bites one to check if it's real. Lead forgeries are common, and finally nods. You've bought yourself a spot for the night. Exactly what that spot entails, you're about to discover, and none of it is going to meet your expectations. The other guests eye you with open assessment. Who are you? What do you have? Are you dangerous? Are you weak? Medieval society runs on a different social calculus than ours. There's no police force coming if something goes wrong. There's no emergency services, no lawyers, no regulatory oversight. If you get robbed, beaten, or killed in this inn tonight, Your best hope is that someone cares enough to mention it to the local Lord's bailiff, who might or might not investigate depending on whether he thinks justice is worth the effort. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was more effective than its reputation suggests. But here's the thing. When you're negotiating the social dynamics of a room full of armed strangers, academic debates don't matter much. You find a spot against the wall as far from the door as possible. You've learned that the door area is where cold air rushes in every time someone enters or leaves, which is constantly. You also want to avoid being directly in the traffic pattern, because people will step on you, trip over you, and spill things on you all night long. The wall itself is rough timber, splintery and stained with decades of accumulated grease, smoke, and liquids you're choosing not to analyze. You set down your pack, which you're not letting out of your sight for even a moment, and try to adjust to your new reality. This is home for the night. This smoke-filled, overcrowded, dangerous, uncomfortable, expensive room is the best shelter available between here and the next settlement. You've paid for the privilege of not dying of exposure in the dark. Everything else, safety, sleep, dignity, is optional and unlikely. Welcome to the Medieval Roadside Inn. The night has only just begun, and you're already wondering if wolves might have been the better option. The common room operates on a logic that makes absolutely no sense to your modern sensibilities, but to everyone else here, this chaos is just Tuesday. The fire pit in the center of the room dominates everything. It's the heat source, the light source, the cooking area, and the social hub all at once. A massive iron pot hangs over the flames from a chain attached to a ceiling beam, and whatever's bubbling inside that pot is going to be your dinner whether you like it or not. The fire itself is never allowed to go out completely, because starting a new fire is expensive and time-consuming. You need flint and steel, or you need to borrow flames from a neighbor, and neither option is convenient at 3 in the morning when the fire dies down to embers. Around this fire, humanity packs itself in layers based on a complex social hierarchy that you're already violating just by existing. The spots closest to the flames are premium real estate, claimed by whoever got here first or whoever's intimidating enough to defend their position. You see a merchant in relatively fine wool clothing, though fine is relative when everything is hand-woven and nothing has been washed in recent memory, occupying a bench that probably cost him double what you paid. He's got a wooden cup of ale, and he's trying very hard to look like someone who isn't terrified of being robbed, which means he's definitely terrified of being robbed. Next to him, a group of pilgrims huddle together for safety in numbers. You can identify them by their badges, pewter tokens purchased at shrines to prove they've completed their pilgrimage. These badges are pinned to their hats or cloaks, and in some cases, people wear dozens of them, turning their clothing into a kind of medieval resume of spiritual tourism. There's one woman, and yes, women did travel as pilgrims, though it was dangerous and socially complicated, who has badges from Canterbury, Walsingham, and what looks like Santiago de Compostela, which means she's walked hundreds of miles across medieval Europe and lived to tell about it. Respect. But here's where things get interesting. There are also animals in here. Not metaphorically, actual animals. A dog of indeterminate breed is sleeping near the fire, sprawled across the rushes like he owns the place. He's probably the innkeeper's, or maybe he just lives here and everyone's accepted him as permanent staff. Dogs in medieval times weren't the pampered pets we have today. They were working animals, ratters and guards, and this one looks like he's seen some things. His fur is matted, one ear is torn, and he's got that lean, scrappy look that says he wins fights. There's also a chicken. Yes, a chicken, just wandering around pecking at the floor rushes, looking for dropped food scraps. This isn't someone's dinner that escaped. This is just a chicken that apparently has access to the inn. In medieval rural settings, the line between indoor and outdoor spaces was blurry at best. Animals came inside for warmth, to be milked, to be monitored, or just because nobody bothered to keep them out. You might also see pigs, goats, or even horses sharing space in some inns, particularly smaller establishments where the ground floor was partially stable and partially human accommodation. The noise level is stunning. Multiple conversations overlap in different languages and dialects. Remember, England in the medieval period is a linguistic mess. You've got Middle English, which is different enough from modern English that you'd struggle to understand it fully. You've got French, because Norman French is still the language of nobility and law. You've got Latin, because that's the language of the church and educated people. And you've got various regional dialects that might as well be separate languages. That pilgrim from Yorkshire sounds completely different from the merchant from Cornwall, and both of them sound alien to the traveling friar from London. Someone in the corner is playing a pipe, a simple wooden instrument that produces a thin, reedy sound that cuts through the conversation. He's not playing for art, he's playing for coins. Medieval entertainment is transactional. If you like what you hear, you toss him a penny. If you don't, he'll keep playing anyway because this might be his only income for the day. The tune is something you don't recognize, built on medieval modes that sound slightly off to ears trained on modern major and minor scales. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's not comforting either. It just adds to the general sense of disorientation. Someone else is very drunk, like problematically drunk. He's slumped against a post, singing loudly and tunelessly, and nobody's stopping him because, well, what are you going to do? There's no bouncer, no manager to complain to, no concept of cutting someone off. The innkeeper will keep serving ale as long as someone keeps paying for it. The drunk man is singing something that's either extremely bawdy or completely nonsensical. Your Middle English isn't good enough to tell, and honestly, you're not sure you want to know. Two men near the door are arguing, voices rising, hands on their belt knives. Everyone in here is armed, because of course they are. A knife isn't a weapon in medieval thinking. It's a tool you need for eating, cutting, working, and basically existing. But tools become weapons real fast when tempers flare. The innkeeper watches the argument with the expression of someone who's seen this before and knows it could go either way. These disputes might fizzle out, or they might end with someone bleeding on his floor, which means more rushes to replace and possibly awkward questions from local authorities if the victim was anyone important. The smoke is really getting to you now. Your eyes water continuously, your throat feels raw, and you're starting to understand why medieval people had such high rates of respiratory disease. This constant smoke exposure, combined with poor ventilation and crowded conditions, creates a perfect environment for tuberculosis, pneumonia, and chronic bronchitis. Historians still argue whether the health benefits of cooked food and warmth outweighed the respiratory damage from constant smoke exposure. But sitting here in the haze, you're pretty sure your lungs are filing for divorce from your body. The ceiling beams are black with accumulated soot, decades of smoke staining the wood until it looks like charcoal. There are hooks hammered into these beams where hams, onions, and herbs hang to cure or dry. The smoke actually helps preserve food, acting as a kind of medieval refrigeration. That's the theory anyway. In practice, it means you're breathing air that's filtered through curing meat and onions, which adds delightful new layers to the already complex smell profile. Speaking of smells, there's a barrel in the corner that you really hope is just ale but might be serving multiple purposes. Medieval inns weren't known for having clearly designated areas for different functions. That barrel could be storage, it could be seating, or it could be, actually, don't investigate. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when you're trying to maintain your appetite for whatever's coming out of that central pot. A woman, probably the innkeeper's wife, though she could be his daughter or hired help, moves through the room with a practiced efficiency that suggests she's done this 1,000 times. She's carrying a wooden tray loaded with cups and a pitcher, refilling drinks and collecting coins. Her dress is wool, patched multiple times, with sleeves rolled up to reveal arms that are muscular from constant labor. Running a medieval inn is backbreaking work. You're cooking for dozens over an open fire, hauling water from a well, carrying firewood, cleaning, sort of, and managing a room full of potentially violent strangers every single night. She's also very clearly pregnant, which makes you realize that family life and business life aren't separated here. Kids are probably sleeping in a loft somewhere overhead, or maybe they're right here in the room, pressed into service even at young ages. Medieval childhood isn't the protected, extended phase we recognize today. By 7 or 8, children are working members of the household, doing age-appropriate labor, which in an inn means maybe helping with dishes, running messages, or keeping the fire fed with wood. The conversation around you is fascinating once you start picking out threads. Those pilgrims are discussing the shrine they're headed to. Apparently there's a new saint's tomb that's producing miracles, or at least that's the claim. Medieval people are intensely religious, but not always in ways we'd recognize. Religion is practical. You pray to specific saints for specific problems. Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Anthony for lost items, Saint Christopher for travel safety, which, given where you are right now, someone should have prayed to more fervently. The line between faith and superstition is basically non-existent. People believe in miracles and magic, devils and fairies, with the same certainty they believe the sun will rise. The merchant is trying to make conversation with a man who might be a minor nobleman. You can tell by the quality of his boots, which are leather and actually fit properly, a luxury most people can't afford. They're discussing wool prices, tax collectors, and the state of the roads. Apparently, there's a bridge out about 10 miles ahead, which means a detour that adds half a day to everyone's journey. This is valuable information, but it also highlights how dependent medieval travel is on infrastructure that's constantly failing. Bridges wash out, roads turn to impassable mud, ferries sink. The Roman road system is crumbling and nobody has the organizational capacity or resources to maintain it properly. Something crashes in the corner. Someone's knocked over a bench, and there's shouting. The two men who were arguing have escalated to shoving. Everyone in the room tenses, hands moving toward weapons, trying to judge if this is about to become their problem. The innkeeper barks something harsh and threatening, and miraculously, the situation de-escalates. Both men are red-faced and breathing hard, but they separate, moving to opposite sides of the room. Crisis averted, though the tension lingers like the smoke. This is the thing about medieval inns, they're pressure cookers of human stress. Everyone here is tired, uncomfortable, probably sick of traveling, definitely sick of each other and armed. You've got religious pilgrims mixing with soldiers, merchants mixing with laborers, respectable widows mixing with women who are definitely not respectable. The class system that normally keeps medieval society organized breaks down in these spaces. Sure, the wealthy get better spots and better treatment, but everyone's still in the same room, breathing the same air, sharing the same risks. That risk includes disease, by the way. You're looking around this packed room, and you should know that at least several of these people are sick. Medieval Europe is constantly battling plague, typhus, dysentery, smallpox, tuberculosis, and a dozen other diseases that spread easily in crowded, unsanitary conditions. That pilgrim with the persistent cough? Could be nothing, could be TB. That merchant who looks pale and keeps sweating despite the temperature? Might be fever from any number of infections. You won't know until symptoms become obvious. And by then, you've been breathing the same air and touching the same surfaces for hours. The chicken has wandered over to investigate your pack, pecking experimentally at the leather. You shoo it away, which earns you an indignant squawk and a dirty look from the bird. The dog opens one eye to assess the commotion, decides it's not worth his attention, and goes back to sleep. This is their inn as much as anyone's. Maybe more, because they'll still be here tomorrow when you're gone. The evening is wearing on, and your body is reminding you that you've been walking all day. Your feet hurt, your back aches, and you're desperately thirsty. That ale the innkeeper's wife is serving is looking increasingly appealing, despite the fact that it's almost certainly been watered down and is probably brewing bacteria cultures that would fascinate modern microbiologists. But we'll get to the drinking situation in a moment. For now, you're just trying to adapt to this room. The smoke, the noise, the crowd, the animals, the constant low-level threat of violence, and the growing realization that this is going to be a very, very long night. Eventually, exhaustion trumps discomfort, and you need to figure out where exactly you're supposed to sleep. The word bed in a medieval roadside inn is doing some seriously heavy linguistic lifting, and you're about to discover just how flexible that definition can be. The innkeeper gestures vaguely toward a ladder leading to a loft space above the common room, or maybe toward a side room that's barely separated from the main area by a wattle partition that wouldn't stop a determined mouse, let alone a determined thief. You climb the ladder, which is less a ladder and more a series of wooden pegs hammered into the wall, and emerge into a space that makes the common room look luxurious by comparison. The loft is essentially an attic with delusions of grandeur. The ceiling slopes dramatically following the roofline, which means you can only stand upright in the very center. The thatch is right there above your head, and you can see daylight, well, moonlight now, filtering through gaps where the weather has damaged the roof. When it rains, and it will rain because this is England, water is going to come through those gaps and land on whoever's unlucky enough to be sleeping beneath them. The floor is rough wooden planks with gaps between them, which means everything happening in the common room below, all that noise, smoke, and smell, rises directly into your sleeping space. Privacy is a concept that hasn't been invented yet, or at least hasn't been implemented in roadside inns. The beds are actually just communal sleeping platforms. Think of a very large shelf built against the walls, raised a foot or two off the floor. This elevation is crucial because the floor level is where rats live, and you definitely don't want to be sleeping where rats can easily access you. The platforms are covered with straw, which is the medieval equivalent of a mattress. Not straw and ticking, not a straw mattress with fabric covering, just loose straw scattered on wooden boards. You poke at it experimentally and immediately disturb something that scurries away. Could be a mouse, could be a rat, could be one of several species of insect that call this straw home. Here's the truly horrifying part. You're not sleeping alone. Individual beds for individual travelers is a luxury reserved for the wealthy staying at upscale urban inns. Here, you're sharing this sleeping platform with strangers. The innkeeper's allocation system is simple. People keep arriving until the space is full, and full is defined as we can't physically fit anyone else. You might be sleeping next to 3, 4, or 5 other people, all lying perpendicular to the wall like sardines in a very uncomfortable tin. The pilgrims from downstairs are already here, claiming spaces and arranging their belongings. You try to position yourself between people who look relatively trustworthy, which is a nearly impossible calculation. That friar with the kind face could be genuine, could be a con artist. Fake religious figures were common enough that the church constantly complained about them. That young couple who seemed sweet might be pickpockets working as a team. Medieval travel advice manuals, yes, those existed, specifically warn about thieves who work in pairs, one distracting you while the other rifles through your belongings. You keep your pack close, using it as a pillow, which means you're sleeping on a lumpy collection of your worldly possessions and trying not to think about how your coin purse is the only thing between your skull and wooden boards. Some travelers sleep with their arms through the straps of their bags, creating a physical connection that would wake them if someone tried to steal it. Others sleep on top of their possessions entirely. The really paranoid, and let's be honest, in this context paranoia is just good sense, keep their knives in hand. The straw beneath you is alive. That's the only word for it. You can feel things moving in it. Fleas are the least of your concerns, though they're definitely present. Fleas loved medieval life. All those unwashed bodies, all that animal contact, all these perfect opportunities to hop from host to host. You're going to wake up with bites, guaranteed. Bedbugs are also here, living in the cracks of the wooden platform and emerging at night to feed. These aren't like modern bedbugs that are mostly an annoying inconvenience. Medieval bedbugs are carrying potential diseases, and they're joining forces with lice, mites, and other parasites to make your night miserable. Historians still argue whether medieval people were as bothered by parasites as we would be, or whether they'd simply adapted to accept them as an unavoidable part of life. Evidence suggests both. Yes, people tried to combat lice and fleas with various methods, but also yes, they accepted a baseline level of infestation that would send modern people screaming to the emergency room. There are medieval poems complaining about fleas, medical texts suggesting remedies, mostly ineffective, and even illuminated manuscripts showing people picking lice from their hair like it's a normal social activity. Because it was. The person settling in next to you is a laborer based on his clothes. Rough, undyed wool, heavily patched, with hands that are calloused and scarred from manual work. He nods at you, not unfriendly, and proceeds to remove his outer tunic. That's it. That's all the undressing that happens. Medieval people don't have pajamas. If you're lucky, you might have a linen undertunic that you sleep in, but most people just sleep in whatever they're wearing, maybe removing their outer layer if it's particularly heavy or muddy. The concept of special sleeping clothes is a luxury that won't become common for centuries. This creates an interesting situation because everyone is now lying down in their day clothes, which haven't been washed in weeks or months, on straw that hasn't been changed in similar time frames, sharing body heat and parasites with abandon. The smell is extraordinary. A thick, dense, human musk mixed with wood smoke, stale beer, animal dung tracked in on shoes, and whatever mysterious substance that straw was previously used for. Your nose starts to adjust after a while, the same way you stop noticing a smell when you're exposed to it constantly. But initially, it's like being hit in the face with a physical wall of odor. On your other side, a woman is settling in with 2 small children. This isn't unusual. Families traveled together, and children went wherever their parents went. The kids are maybe 5 and 7, old enough to walk long distances but young enough to still need supervision. They're whispering together, and you catch fragments of conversation about whether there are monsters in the thatch. Their mother shushes them gently, pulling a thin blanket, really just a piece of worn wool fabric, over all 3 of them. This is their blanket from home, one of their few possessions, and they're clutching it against the cold that's already seeping in as the fire downstairs burns lower. Because here's another delightful fact. There's no heating up here. All the warmth from that fire in the common room rises through the gaps in the floorboards, which provides some ambient heat, but it's not enough. It's autumn, heading toward winter, and medieval buildings are not insulated. That straw you're lying on provides minimal insulation from the cold wooden platform beneath. Your body heat, combined with the body heat of all these strangers, is going to be your primary warmth source. This is why people packed sleeping spaces so tightly. More bodies meant more warmth. It's practical, but it also means you're going to spend the night pressed against strangers, feeling them shift and breathe and occasionally grope for their belongings in the dark. A man across the platform is already snoring. Deep, rattling snores that suggest serious respiratory issues. Could be sleep apnea, could be tuberculosis, could just be the accumulated damage of breathing smoke his entire life. Whatever it is, it's loud, and it's going to continue all night. Someone else mutters a complaint, but nobody tells him to stop because what would be the point? You can't control your snoring when you're asleep, and besides, half the people here are going to be snoring within the hour. You try to arrange yourself on the straw, looking for a position that might qualify as comfortable. This is impossible. The straw pokes through your clothes, the boards beneath are hard and uneven, and you can't stretch out fully because that would encroach on someone else's space. You end up lying on your side, knees slightly bent, arms wrapped around your pack, staring at the thatch above and trying not to think about everything that might fall out of it during the night. The couple next to the family is engaging in activities that you really wish they weren't engaging in. There's no privacy here, remember? These sleeping platforms are communal, and what's happening in one section is visible and audible to everyone else. Medieval people had different standards for privacy, basically none, but even so, this seems bold. Nobody says anything though, because what would you say? Excuse me, could you not? This is their sleeping space too, and if they want to use it for that, well, that's their business. You just have to lie there and pretend you don't notice, which is difficult when you're literally 3 feet away. Something drops from the thatch and lands on your shoulder. You brush it away frantically, trying not to imagine what it was. Straw debris? Insect? Mouse dropping? The thatch is home to an entire ecosystem. Mice, spiders, various insects, possibly birds depending on the season. All of these creatures shed waste, which accumulates in the straw and periodically falls on whoever's below. This is why people wear head coverings to sleep when they have them. That linen coif isn't just fashion. It's protection against whatever the ceiling decides to share. The children are whimpering now, cold and uncomfortable and probably hungry. Their mother is singing something soft, a lullaby in a dialect you can't quite place, trying to soothe them to sleep. It's actually kind of touching, this moment of tenderness in the middle of all this hardship. Medieval parents loved their children just as much as modern parents do, even if they had fewer resources to provide for them and much higher chances of losing them to disease, accident, or malnutrition. You're lying there trying to sleep, and you realize you need to use the bathroom. We'll get to the full horror of medieval toilet facilities in a bit, but for now, just know that getting up means climbing down that ladder in the dark, navigating through the common room where people are still drinking and arguing and finding the facilities, and we're using facilities extremely generously without breaking your neck or getting robbed. So you hold it. You're going to hold it as long as humanly possible, because the alternative is worse. More people are climbing up the ladder, more bodies packing into the available space. The platform that seemed spacious 15 minutes ago is now claustrophobically full. You're pressed between the laborer on one side and the family on the other, with absolutely no room to move without disturbing someone. This is it. This is where you're sleeping tonight. On dirty straw, surrounded by strangers, sharing parasites, breathing smoke, listening to snoring and other activities, trying not to think about disease or theft or the structural integrity of this building. And you paid for this. You actually gave someone money for this experience. But the alternative was sleeping outside, where it's colder, darker, more dangerous, and there are actual wolves. So this is the better option. This is medieval luxury. This is what it looks like when you can afford shelter. Welcome to your bed for the night. May you survive until morning with your health, your belongings, and possibly your sanity intact. Your stomach is starting to make its opinions known, and unfortunately, those opinions need to be addressed with whatever the innkeeper is serving. You've smelled what's in that pot since you arrived. A thick, murky aroma that's part savory, part suspicious, and entirely unavoidable. Medieval Roadside Inn food operates on a simple principle. You eat what you're given, you're grateful it's hot, and you absolutely do not ask questions about ingredients, preparation methods, or how long that pot has been continuously cooking. The main dish at virtually every inn is pottage, which is basically everything soup. It's a thick stew made from whatever's available, affordable, or hasn't rotted yet. The base is usually grains, oats, barley, or peas, cooked down until they form a porridge-like consistency. Then you add whatever vegetables are in season or preserved from the last season. Onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, and if you're lucky, maybe some herbs. The protein situation is where things get interesting, and by interesting we mean concerning. There might be meat in your pottage, but identifying what kind of meat is an adventure you're not prepared for. Beef and pork are too expensive for roadside inn fare, Those meats go to noble tables or urban markets where people can pay premium prices. What you're getting is more likely to be mutton from an old sheep that stopped producing wool, rabbit or hare caught locally, or miscellaneous poultry, which is a polite way of saying whatever birds could be trapped or raised cheaply. That chicken you saw wandering around earlier? Hope you didn't get attached because his cousin might be in this pot. The innkeeper's wife ladles a portion into a wooden bowl. Your bowl? Though your is temporary since this bowl has served hundreds of previous travelers and will serve hundreds more. It's been wiped out between uses, maybe rinsed if water was available, but certainly not washed in any way that would satisfy modern health standards. The bowl itself is worn smooth from use, stained dark from years of oily pottage, with a crack running down one side that's been there so long everyone just accepts it as a design feature. You get a wooden spoon along with it, and you should feel fortunate because sometimes travelers are expected to bring their own eating utensils or use bread as an edible spoon. You look down into your bowl, and the pottage looks back at you with the thick, gray-brown consistency of something that has transcended its original ingredients to become its own entity. There are chunks of things floating in it, root vegetables probably, or possibly turnip, or possibly something you're choosing not to identify. The surface has a thin film of fat, which is actually good because fat means calories and calories mean energy for tomorrow's walking. Your modern sensibilities are screaming, but your medieval stomach knows this is dinner and there's nothing else coming. The taste is fine actually, not good but not terrible. It's heavily salted, which is the primary preservation method and flavor enhancer. Salt is expensive. It's mined from coastal areas or extracted from seawater through evaporation, then transported inland at considerable cost. The amount of salt in food is actually a status indicator. The wealthy can afford to salt their food generously. The poor use it sparingly. In food falls somewhere in the middle, salty enough to be preserved and palatable, but not so salty that the innkeeper is wasting profit. There are other flavors too. Onion definitely, some kind of herb that might be thyme or might be something that just grows wild near the inn, and that underlying gamey taste that all mystery meat seems to have. You're eating without utensils sometimes because that bread on the side, that's called a trencher and it serves as your plate. Trenchers are thick slices of stale bread, usually several days old, so they're firm enough to hold liquid without immediately disintegrating. You pile your pottage on the bread, let it soak in, then eat the bread at the end. It's an edible plate, which means no dishes to wash, and it ensures that nothing gets wasted. Sometimes trenchers are collected after the meal and given to the poor or to dogs, because even bread that's been sitting under pottage for an hour is still food in a world where food is never guaranteed. The bread itself is dark and dense. This is not the fluffy white sandwich bread you're familiar with. Medieval bread is made from whatever grain is cheapest, rye, barley, or a mixture called maslin that's part wheat, part rye. White bread exists, but it's for the wealthy because wheat flour is expensive and making pure white bread requires sifting the flour multiple times to remove the bran. What you're getting is whole grain in the most literal sense. The entire grain ground up, sometimes with bonus ingredients like peas, beans, or even tree bark if times are especially hard. There's a reason medieval people had serious dental problems, and it's partly because their bread contained enough grit and unground fragments to wear down tooth enamel like sandpaper. Speaking of dental problems, you bite into something hard in the pottage. Could be a seed, could be a bone fragment, could be a small stone that made it through the grain grinding process. You fish it out discreetly and set it aside. Everyone else is eating without comment, and you realize this is just normal. Finding random inedible bits in your food is expected. You work around them, you spit them out, you don't complain because complaining won't change anything, and might mark you as a difficult customer who deserves worse treatment. The ale situation deserves its own discussion because this is your beverage choice. Ale or nothing. Water is not served at meals because water is dangerous. Medieval people aren't stupid. They've figured out through hard experience that water from wells, streams, and rivers can make you sick. They don't know about bacteria or waterborne pathogens, but they know the correlation between drinking water and getting dysentery. Ale is safer because the brewing process involves boiling the water, which kills most pathogens, and the alcohol provides additional antibacterial properties. It's not safe by modern standards, but it's safer than straight water. The ale in your wooden cup is weak, maybe 2 or 3% alcohol by volume. This is small ale or table ale, meant to be consumed in quantity throughout the day by everyone including children. Yes, medieval children drank ale because it was safer than water. Before you judge this too harshly, remember that the alternative was genuinely dangerous water that could kill them with cholera, typhoid, or dysentery. A little alcohol was the lesser evil. The ale tastes flat and slightly sour, nothing like modern beer. There's no carbonation, no hop bitterness. Hops won't become standard in English brewing for another century or so. Instead, ale is flavored with grut, a mixture of herbs that might include yarrow, mugwort, heather, or whatever the local alewife threw in. That's another thing. Most ale is brewed by women called alewives, who produce it in their homes and sell it locally. The inn probably has a relationship with a local brewer, or maybe the innkeeper's wife brews it herself in whatever time she has between the 1,000 other tasks required to run this establishment. Brewing is constant work because ale doesn't keep long. Without hops, it starts going sour within a few days. What you're drinking is probably fresh, which is good, but it might also be starting to turn, which is less good but still drinkable by medieval standards. You're supposed to tip the alewife or the server, by the way. There's no set price for the meal. It's included in your room rate, such as it is, but tipping is expected if you want decent service or if you want to ensure your next cup of ale isn't the dregs from the bottom of the barrel. You fish out a small coin and hand it over, receiving a gap-toothed smile in return. The innkeeper's wife has lost several teeth, which is completely normal for her age. Dental care doesn't exist beyond pulling teeth when they become too painful to bear, and that's done by barbers or traveling tooth pullers using tools that haven't been cleaned and techniques that would make a modern dentist faint. Around you, other travelers are eating with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The wealthy merchant is picking at his pottage, clearly unimpressed but eating anyway because he's pragmatic. The pilgrims are blessing their food before eating, making signs of the cross and muttering prayers. Medieval Christianity is woven into every aspect of daily life, and that includes meals. Saying grace isn't optional or performative. It's genuine gratitude to God for providing food when starvation is a real possibility for many people. One of the pilgrims is eating fish instead of pottage. It's Friday, which means no meat for observant Catholics, and fish is the acceptable alternative. The fish looks like it's been salted and dried, then reconstituted by soaking and cooking. It's probably cod or herring. Both keep well when preserved and are cheap enough for common people to afford. The smell is powerful, adding yet another layer to the inn's aromatic complexity. Historians still argue whether medieval fasting rules were strictly observed by ordinary people, or whether they were more flexible in practice, but these pilgrims are clearly taking their religious obligations seriously. You notice that vegetables appear in the pottage but not as side dishes. Salads don't exist in medieval cuisine. Raw vegetables are viewed with suspicion. Medical theory holds that cold, wet foods are dangerous to the digestive system, and vegetables definitely qualify as cold and wet. They need to be cooked thoroughly, transformed by fire and heat into something safer. Fruit has similar problems. Apples, pears, and berries are eaten fresh when in season, but they're also considered potentially dangerous, especially for people with delicate constitutions. The wealthy sometimes eat elaborate fruit preserves or comfits, but here at the roadside inn, if you want fruit, you're getting it cooked into the pottage or not at all. The bread basket comes around again, and you take another piece because you're still hungry and bread is filling even if it doubles as a jaw workout. This bread will sit in your stomach like a stone, slowly releasing energy over the next several hours, which is exactly what you need for tomorrow's walking. Medieval people understand food as fuel. They don't eat for pleasure primarily. They eat for the calories required to do physical labor. Everything about this meal is designed to be cheap to produce, filling to eat, and capable of keeping you alive until the next meal. Someone has brought out cheese, a hard, aged cheese that's more suitable for grating than eating in chunks. It's been produced locally, probably from sheep or goat milk, and it's survived without refrigeration because it's been salted, pressed, and aged until it's basically indestructible. You hack off a piece with your knife. Everyone has their own knife, remember, and it's sharp, salty, and so firm it takes serious chewing. But it's protein and fat, and both are valuable. You eat it slowly, alternating with ale to help wash it down. The meal winds down not because you're full, but because you've been served your portion and there's no more coming. The innkeeper's wife is already collecting bowls, wiping them out with a rag that's seen better days, and stacking them for the next round of travelers. Your wooden cup is empty, and you could ask for more ale, but you're mindful of the bathroom situation that's looming in your near future. The less liquid you consume now, the less you'll need to deal with those facilities later. You've survived dinner. Your stomach is fuller than it was, even if your taste buds are confused and your digestive system is wondering what you've just subjected it to. The pottage was adequate, the bread was filling, the ale was wet, and you've consumed enough calories to make it through the night. By medieval standards, this was a successful meal. By your standards, you're already thinking fondly of the antibiotics you'll need when you get home. But for now, you're fed, and that's more than many people in this world can say. The meal sits heavy in your stomach, and biology is making demands that can no longer be ignored. You need to find the toilet facilities, and this is where medieval in life goes from uncomfortable to genuinely horrifying. The concept of a bathroom as we know it, a private room with plumbing, running water, and waste removal systems, is so far in the future it might as well be science fiction. What you're about to experience is medieval waste management at its most basic and least dignified. You ask the innkeeper where the privy is, and he gestures vaguely toward the back of the building with an expression that suggests he's glad it's your problem and not his. You make your way through the common room, stepping over sleeping dogs and around travelers who've already passed out drunk, and push through a back door into the yard. The word yard is generous. It's more like a muddy strip of land between the inn and the surrounding darkness, cluttered with firewood, broken barrels, and things you're trying not to look at too closely. The privy itself is a small wooden structure set away from the main building, and you can smell it from 20 feet away. Actually, smell doesn't capture the full sensory assault. This is an olfactory experience that transcends normal odors and becomes almost visible. A thick presence in the air that makes your eyes water and your throat close. You've encountered bad bathrooms before, gas station restrooms, festival porta-potties, that one subway station that shall not be named, but nothing in your experience has prepared you for a medieval privy at a busy roadside inn. The structure is basically a wooden shed built over a pit. That's it. That's the whole technology. You dig a hole in the ground, you build walls around it for minimal privacy, you cut a hole in a wooden seat or plank, and you're done. This particular privy has been in use for months or possibly years, and the pit beneath is approaching capacity, which means the smell has evolved beyond unpleasant into potentially weaponizable. You push open the door, just a piece of wood on leather hinges that doesn't close properly, and the interior is lit only by moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls. There's no window, no ventilation beyond those gaps, and definitely no light source because open flames near concentrated methane gas is how you create explosive situations that medieval people have learned to avoid through unfortunate experience. Your eyes adjust to the darkness, and you can make out the basic features. A wooden bench with a circular hole cut into it, some scattered straw on the floor that's supposed to absorb something, and walls covered in graffiti that's surprisingly elaborate given that most people can't write. The graffiti is actually fascinating from an anthropological perspective. People have carved symbols, crude drawings, and in some cases actual words into the wood. There are religious symbols, crosses, images that might be saints, alongside much cruder imagery depicting human anatomy and various acts. Medieval people had the same bathroom humor we do. They just expressed it with knives on privy walls. Some marks are probably makers' marks or personal symbols, ways of saying, "I was here," in a world where most people leave no permanent record of their existence. You approach the seat with deep reluctance, and looking down into the hole is a mistake you immediately regret. The pit below is dark, but not dark enough to hide what's accumulated there. This is a communal facility serving dozens of people daily, and the pit hasn't been emptied in recent memory. Medieval waste disposal is somebody's job, usually the lowest status workers, often called gong farmers or night soil men. But it happens infrequently, and in privies are low priority compared to urban cesspits. So this pit just keeps filling until it's physically impossible to use, at which point they might dig a new pit and move the privy structure, or they might just shovel some dirt over this one and call it done. The seat itself is rough wood, splintery in places, worn smooth in others from countless previous users. It's cold, it's dirty, and you're deeply aware that your skin is about to make contact with a surface that hundreds of strangers have used without any cleaning happening between uses. Medieval people don't have our germ theory understanding, but they're not oblivious either. Wealthier people sometimes line privy seats with cloth or bring cushions. Some travelers carry their own portable seat covers made of leather or fabric. You have none of these things, so you're hovering awkwardly, trying to minimize contact while maintaining enough stability not to fall in. Privacy is minimal. The door doesn't lock. Locks are expensive and complicated, and nobody's wasting that technology on a privy. The walls have gaps where the wood has warped or rotted, which means anyone walking by can potentially see in. Sound carries easily through the thin walls. There's no such thing as discreet bathroom use. Everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and the cultural norm is just to pretend you don't notice. Medieval people have a completely different relationship with bodily functions than we do. They're necessary, universal, and not particularly shameful. Everyone poops, everyone pees, and everyone does it in facilities that offer barely more privacy than doing it in the woods. The hygiene situation is where things get truly medieval. There's no toilet paper because that won't be invented for centuries. Instead, there's a pile of straw, some moss, or maybe leaves in the corner. These are your cleaning options. Some establishments provide communal sponges on sticks. Yes, you read that correctly, shared sponges that you rinse in a bucket of water between uses. The Romans had this system in their public latrines, and it lingered in some places into the medieval period. You're desperately hoping this inn doesn't use the sponge system because the mental image alone is enough to make you reconsider whether you really need to go. You opt for the straw because at least straw is disposable and individual pieces can be used once and thrown down the hole. It's not comfortable, it's not effective by modern standards, and you're already thinking about all the medieval people who suffered from hemorrhoids, anal fissures, and various infections that we prevent with basic hygiene. When you're done, you drop the used straw down the hole and try not to think about it too hard. There's a bucket of water in the corner. This is for hand washing, theoretically. The water is murky, clearly used by multiple people already, and there's no soap because soap is a luxury product that most people don't have regular access to. Soap exists in the medieval period. It's made from animal fat and wood ash, produced in large quantities for textile processing and occasionally for washing. But it's not sitting in every bathroom for casual use. You dip your hands reluctantly, swish them around, and wipe them on your clothes because there's no towel. Your hands are now wet, possibly cleaner than before, but possibly just contaminated with whatever was in that bucket. And you're starting to understand why medieval people had such high rates of intestinal parasites and waterborne diseases. The whole experience has taken maybe 5 minutes, but it feels like an eternity. You escape the privy and breathe deeply of the outside air, which still smells like smoke and animals and general medieval town funk. But compared to the privy, it's like a mountain breeze. You're not alone out here. Another traveler is waiting his turn, shifting from foot to foot with obvious urgency. You nod at each other in the universal acknowledgement of shared suffering, and he hurries into the privy as you head back to the inn. Here's something that makes the situation even more complicated. Not everyone uses the privy. At night, when it's dark and cold and potentially dangerous to go stumbling around outside, people use chamber pots. These are ceramic or metal pots kept under beds or in corners, and they're used for exactly what you think they're used for. In the morning, whoever's responsible for this delightful task, usually women or servants, carries these pots outside and empties them into the cesspit, the river, or just into the street if this is an urban area. Gardelot is the warning cry you might hear in Scottish towns, derived from the French gardes l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, which is a euphemistic way of saying, I'm about to dump a pot of piss and shit out this window, so move. The inn probably has chamber pots available, but they're communal, used by multiple people and emptied irregularly. You could use one later if the need arises and you can't face another trip to the privy. But the thought of squatting over a pot in a room full of sleeping strangers while everyone pretends not to notice is almost as bad as the privy itself. Privacy isn't just absent, it's not even conceptualized as something you might want or deserve. Back inside the inn, you're struck by how everyone just carries on as if the bathroom situation is completely normal. Because it is normal for them. They've never known anything else. The concept of private bathrooms, of toilet paper, of running water and soap and hand sanitizer is as foreign to them as time travel or smartphones. This is just how life works. You deal with your bodily functions in whatever facilities are available, you clean yourself as best you can with whatever materials exist, and you accept that hygiene is limited by technology and resources. Historians still argue whether medieval people were as dirty as popular culture suggests, or whether they actually maintained reasonable hygiene within the constraints of their technology. Evidence suggests both, yes, people bathed more regularly than stereotypes claim, and yes, they understood that cleanliness was related to health. But also yes, their standards were dramatically different from ours, shaped by limited water access, expensive soap, labor-intensive heating systems, and a world where every aspect of daily life was harder than we can imagine. You find your spot back on the sleeping platform, and you're very conscious of the fact that you haven't properly washed your hands. Neither has anyone else here. Everyone has used those facilities or similar ones, everyone has the same limited cleaning options, and now everyone is sharing sleeping space, touching the same surfaces, eating from the same dishes. The chain of contamination is perfect and unbreakable. This is why medieval people had parasites, why diseases spread so efficiently, why life expectancy was so low. It's not that they were stupid or didn't care. It's that the infrastructure for proper sanitation simply didn't exist and wouldn't exist for centuries. You settle back into your straw, trying to find a position that might eventually lead to sleep, and you're profoundly grateful for every modern bathroom you've ever used. The grotty gas station restroom with the broken hand dryer? Paradise. The porta potty at the outdoor concert? Luxury. That airplane bathroom that's always somehow wet? A miracle of modern engineering. You will never complain about a public bathroom again because now you know what the alternative looks like, smells like, and feels like. This knowledge cannot be unlearned, and your relationship with modern plumbing will be forever changed. You've barely settled back into your straw nest when you start really observing your fellow guests. And this is where the medieval inexperience shifts from uncomfortable to genuinely dangerous. The people sharing this space with you represent a cross-section of medieval society, which sounds romantic until you remember that medieval society includes a startling number of individuals who would happily rob, cheat, or murder you if the opportunity presented itself and the risk seemed acceptable. Let's start with the pilgrims, since they seem the safest bet. There are 5 of them traveling together, which is smart. Medieval travel advice consistently recommends journeying in groups for safety. They're headed to Canterbury, same as you supposedly, to visit the shrine of Thomas Becket. Becket was murdered in his own cathedral in 1170 by knights working for King Henry II, and his death instantly created one of medieval Europe's most important pilgrimage sites. His tomb supposedly produces miracles, healings, visions, divine interventions, and people travel hundreds of miles to pray there, to touch the stone where he died, and to collect small phials of Canterbury water, which is regular water mixed with a tiny amount of his blood that's been preserved and diluted so thoroughly it's basically homeopathic saint essence. But here's the thing about medieval pilgrims. Some are genuinely devout, and some are running from the law. Church sanctuary is a real legal protection. If you make it to sacred ground before you're arrested, you can claim sanctuary and avoid prosecution, at least temporarily. Some pilgrims are fulfilling vows, doing penance for sins, or seeking divine intervention for illness. Others are using pilgrimage as an excuse for what's basically medieval tourism, a chance to leave their village, see new places, and have adventures they could never justify otherwise. And some are professional pilgrims who hire themselves out to complete pilgrimages on behalf of wealthy people too old or sick to travel themselves. The woman with all those badges, for instance, she's either incredibly devout, extremely well-traveled, or she's bought some of those badges from sellers who figured out that pilgrimage souvenirs are profitable whether the buyer actually completed the pilgrimage or not. Fake relics and badges are common enough that the church constantly complains about them. There's probably more wood from the true cross circulating in medieval Europe than could construct a small fleet of ships. Splinters of bone from saints could fill entire ossuaries. The economics of pilgrimage include a robust market in fraudulent holy objects. Next to the pilgrims, there's a group of merchants. You can identify them by their slightly better clothing and the locked chests they're guarding obsessively. These men are transporting goods between markets, possibly wool or cloth, maybe metalwork or luxury items like spices. They're targets, obviously, because everyone knows merchants carry money. They've hired guards, or at least one of them is clearly armed and alert in a way that suggests professional security. This guard hasn't slept, you notice. He's sitting with his back to the wall, hand on his sword hilt, watching everyone with the dead-eyed vigilance of someone who's seen how quickly things can go wrong. Merchants are essential to medieval economy but socially complicated. They're wealthy, sometimes wealthier than minor nobility, but they're not noble themselves. They work with their hands, technically, even if that work is counting money and negotiating deals. The church has complicated feelings about merchants because making money from money, charging interest, engaging in what could be considered usury, is technically sinful. But everyone needs merchants, so they occupy this weird middle status where they're simultaneously respected for their success and looked down on for their means of achieving it. There's a friar sleeping near the fire, or pretending to sleep, you're not entirely sure. Friars are different from monks. Monks live in monasteries, stay in one place, and follow strict rules. Friars are mobile, traveling between communities, preaching, hearing confessions, and theoretically living on charity. The Franciscans took vows of poverty, owning nothing, depending entirely on donations. The Dominicans focused on preaching and combating heresy. But the reality is murkier. Some friars are genuine holy men doing important religious work, and some are con artists using religious authority to extract money from gullible peasants. This particular friar has a well-fed look that suggests his vow of poverty is being interpreted flexibly. His robe is wool, decent quality, not the rough sackcloth you'd expect from someone who's supposedly renounced worldly goods. He's got a leather bag that probably contains his portable altar kit, the items needed to say Mass when he's traveling, but it might also contain money, food, or items of value. Historians still argue whether the medieval church's actual practices matched its stated ideals, but evidence suggests that lots of clergy at all levels found creative ways to reconcile spiritual obligations with practical needs and personal comfort. There's a woman traveling alone, which is noteworthy because it's rare and risky. She's older, maybe 40 or 50, which in medieval terms means she's survived a lot. She could be a widow traveling to join family. She could be a businesswoman. Some women, particularly widows, ran businesses and traveled for trade. Or she could be a prostitute because sex work exists in medieval society and roadside inns are definitely places where that commerce happens. You can't tell just by looking, and it would be rude to ask, but everyone in the room has probably made assumptions based on nothing more than the fact that she's alone and female. Medieval women who travel independently are either very brave, very desperate, or very experienced. The roads are dangerous for everyone, but especially for women who face all the standard risks of robbery and violence plus the additional risk of sexual assault. Laws exist against rape, and theoretically it's punished harshly, but enforcement is inconsistent and conviction requires either witnesses or physical evidence that's difficult to provide. Many women travel disguised as men, cutting their hair short and binding their breasts, because male presentation offers more safety. Some women travel as part of family groups or attach themselves to larger parties for protection. In the corner, there's a man who might be a soldier or might just be someone who's armed and dangerous. He's got a sword, not a common possession because swords are expensive and legally restricted in some jurisdictions. He could be a knight's retainer, traveling on his lord's business. He could be a mercenary between contracts, drifting from conflict to conflict. He could be a bandit scouting the inn for potential victims. Medieval military professionals exist in this gray zone between legal enforcement and organized crime, depending on who's paying them and what they're being paid to do. The distinction between soldier and criminal is often unclear. Soldiers are bandits with official sanction. Bandits are soldiers without current employment. The same man might be defending a castle in spring, raiding villages in summer, and robbing travelers in autumn, depending on what opportunities present themselves. The end of military campaigns regularly releases armed, trained, desperate men into the general population with no job prospects and limited moral qualms about using their skills to survive. There's also a family that's clearly struggling. A man, woman, and 3 children, all thin, all wearing clothes that are patched beyond patching. They're not eating the pottage from the pot, they're eating something they brought with them, probably hard bread and maybe dried peas, stretching their own supplies to avoid paying in prices. The children look hungry in that hollow-eyed way that suggests chronic malnutrition, not just missing a meal. This is what poverty looks like in medieval England. Families traveling, probably looking for work, possibly displaced by economic changes or agricultural failures. The medieval economy is brutal and unstable. Bad harvests create famines. Livestock diseases wipe out herds. Wars disrupt trade and destroy crops. Changes in the wool market can devastate entire regions that depend on textile production. When these disruptions hit, people migrate, looking for anywhere they might survive. They show up at inns like this, spending their last coins on minimal shelter, hoping the next town offers employment or charity. Many don't make it. They die on the road, or they turn to crime, or they end up in poorhouses and hospitals that are really just places to go and die with minimal supervision. You're also sharing space with people who are visibly sick. That man with the persistent cough hasn't stopped coughing since you arrived, and now that you're paying attention, you notice he's flushed, sweating despite the cold, and shaking slightly. Fever. He's got a fever from something, could be tuberculosis, could be pneumonia, could be any of dozens of infections that medieval people get and sometimes survive. He should probably be in bed, but he's traveling, which means whatever he's trying to accomplish is more important than his health, or he has no choice but to keep moving. Disease spreads incredibly efficiently in medieval inns. Everyone sharing close quarters, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces, sleeping in the same beds. Tuberculosis is endemic. a slow killer that spreads through respiratory droplets and thrives in crowded, poorly ventilated spaces. Typhus spreads through lice, which everyone has. Dysentery spreads through fecal contamination, which is unavoidable given the sanitation situation. Plague, when it's active, spreads through fleas from rats, and inns are absolutely full of rats. The Black Death hit Europe starting in 1347, killing somewhere between 30 and 60% of the population over the next few years. It's the most famous pandemic, but it's not the only one. Disease is constant in medieval life. Smallpox, measles, typhoid, cholera, and dozens of other illnesses cycle through populations with depressing regularity. Medical understanding is limited. People know disease spreads person to person somehow. They know certain conditions make it worse, but they don't have germ theory. They blame bad air, divine punishment, astrological influences, or imbalances in bodily humors. There's someone in the room who you're now realizing is probably actively dying. An old man, or someone who looks old, though he might only be 40, is lying on the sleeping platform, barely moving, making wet, labored breathing sounds. Nobody's doing anything to help him. Nobody seems particularly concerned. This is just how it is. People get sick, people die, and if you're dying at an inn surrounded by strangers, well, at least you're not dying alone in a ditch. The innkeeper will probably report the death to local authorities. The body will be removed and buried in the parish churchyard, and life will continue. Medieval people have a completely different relationship with death than we do. Death is common, visible, and unavoidable. Infant mortality is staggeringly high. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of children die before age 5. Maternal mortality from childbirth is the leading cause of death for women of childbearing age. Accidents, disease, violence, and malnutrition kill people at every age. The average life expectancy at birth is somewhere in the 30s, though if you survive childhood, you might make it to 60 or beyond. This means everyone here has lost people. Lost children, lost siblings, lost parents, lost spouses. Grief is universal and communal. The church provides structure for mourning. Prayers for the dead, masses said for their souls, burial in consecrated ground. But the emotional reality is that death is so common it can't completely devastate you every time, or you'd never function. You mourn, you pray, you move on, because survival requires you to keep working, keep traveling, keep pushing forward. You're lying here surrounded by humanity in all its medieval complexity. The devout and the criminal, the sick and the healthy, the desperate and the merely uncomfortable. Any one of these people could be a threat. Anyone could be an ally. Most are just trying to survive until morning, same as you. This is the reality of medieval travel. You're forced into intimate proximity with strangers about whom you know nothing and can verify nothing. And you have to navigate the social dynamics while keeping yourself safe, fed, and alive. The room is settling into an uneasy quiet as more people drift towards sleep. But you're awake, hypervigilant, watching your fellow guests and wondering which of them poses the greatest danger, and realizing that the answer might be all of them or none of them, and you won't know until something happens. Welcome to medieval trust issues, entirely justified, completely rational, and utterly exhausting. You've finally closed your eyes, exhausted enough that even this straw-covered plank is starting to feel almost acceptable, when the real nighttime symphony begins. If you thought the inn was noisy during the evening, you were adorably naive. The overnight hours transform this space into an acoustic nightmare that makes sleep nearly impossible and tests the limits of human endurance. The snoring starts in earnest around midnight. Not just one person, that would be manageable, almost rhythmic, something your brain might eventually filter out. No, you're dealing with a full chorus of snorers, each operating on different rhythms, pitches, and volumes. The laborer next to you produces a deep, rattling snore that sounds like rocks tumbling in a barrel. It builds gradually with each inhale, reaches a crescendo, then cuts off abruptly in a way that makes you think he's stopped breathing entirely, followed by a gasping snort as he starts the cycle again. Sleep apnea isn't diagnosed in medieval times, but it definitely exists, and you're getting an intimate demonstration. Across the platform, someone else is contributing a higher-pitched, whistle-like snore that cuts through the deeper rumbles like a particularly annoying flute player who's lost the melody. There's also a woman whose snoring is more like a gentle purr, almost pleasant in isolation, but layered with everything else it just adds to the chaos. The merchant downstairs has a snore that sounds vaguely like words, a muttering, grumbling vocalization that makes you wonder if he's actually sleep-talking or if his snoring just accidentally sounds linguistic. Then there's the coughing. Remember that sick man? He's coughing regularly now, deep, wet, productive coughs that go on for minutes at a time. Each coughing fit wakes him partially. You hear him shift and groan, maybe spit into the straw, then settle back down until the next fit hits 20 minutes later. It's the kind of cough that speaks to serious respiratory infection, and every time he coughs, you're breathing the same air, sharing his germs, and mentally calculating your odds of catching whatever he has. But the coughing isn't alone. Someone else has a different cough, drier, more persistent, probably from the smoke exposure rather than infection. And someone's sniffling constantly, that wet, snorting sound of someone with a head cold trying to breathe through congested sinuses. Medieval people don't have tissues or handkerchiefs in the way we understand them. Wealthy people might have cloth squares, but most people just use their sleeves or their fingers. The hygiene implications are exactly as horrifying as you're imagining. There are also the digestive sounds. Remember that pottage you ate? Everyone ate similar food, and all those digestive systems are processing it simultaneously. The flatulence situation is unbelievable. In a crowded room with no ventilation and no social expectation of holding it in, people just let nature take its course. The smells mix with the existing atmosphere of smoke, sweat, and body odor to create new aromatic combinations that shouldn't exist in nature. Your nose has mostly adapted by now, going into protective shutdown, but occasional wafts of particularly aggressive intestinal output cut through the general funk and remind you that human digestion is not a dignified process. The borborygmi, the technical term for stomach gurgling, is like listening to an orchestra of plumbing problems. Gurgles, groans, rumbles, and squeaks emerge from various directions as everyone's digestive systems work on breaking down medieval cuisine. It's oddly fascinating from an anthropological perspective and absolutely horrifying from a trying-to-sleep perspective. Movement is constant. The sleeping platform is essentially one large shared surface, which means every time someone rolls over, shifts position, or sits up, the whole structure creaks and moves. The wooden planks groan under shifting weight. The straw rustles loudly with each movement, and people move a lot during sleep, especially when they're uncomfortable. That family with the children is particularly active. The kids squirm constantly. The mother keeps reaching out to check on them, and every adjustment sends ripples through the sleeping arrangement. Then there are the rats. Oh yes, the rats. You hear them clearly now in the darkness, scratching in the walls, scurrying across the rafters, bold enough to venture onto the sleeping platform to investigate for food scraps. Medieval rats are different from modern city rats mainly in that they're less cautious. They haven't learned to fear humans because humans haven't figured out effective ways to eliminate them. Cats help, but there's a weird medieval superstition that cats are associated with witchcraft and devil worship, which means some communities actually kill cats, which means the rat population explodes. You hear one rat, or maybe several, it's hard to tell, moving through the straw near your feet. The rustling is distinctive, too deliberate to be wind or natural settling. Something warm brushes against your leg through your clothes and you jerk involuntarily, trying not to scream because that would wake everyone and mark you as weak or panicky. The rat moves on, uninterested in you specifically, looking for dropped food or just passing through on its nightly rounds. You pull your cloak tighter, creating a barrier between you and the floor, and try to convince yourself that the rats are more afraid of you than you are of them. This is a lie, and you both know it. The couple who were engaged in intimate activities earlier have apparently recovered and are starting round 2. The rhythmic creaking and rhythmic sounds are unmistakable and completely shameless. Nobody says anything because what would you say? This is their sleeping space too, and medieval privacy norms are basically non-existent. You lie there trying to think about literally anything else, listening to this acoustic evidence of medieval marital relations, and wondering if they're actually married or if this is just medieval and hookup culture in action. The children are crying now, softly, tiredly, that miserable cry of kids who are cold, uncomfortable, and can't understand why they can't just go home. The mother is shushing them, singing that same lullaby again, but it's not working as well at 3 in the morning when everyone's exhausted and miserable. The father mutters something irritated. The mother snaps back. And now you're listening to a whispered marital argument in Middle English that you can't fully understand, but can definitely follow the emotional tenor of. From downstairs, you hear the ongoing common room activities. Some people are still drinking. You can hear mugs banging on tables, loud voices telling stories or arguing about something. There's sudden laughter, sharp and loud, then shouting, then what sounds like furniture breaking. A fight? Maybe. Or maybe someone just fell off a bench. The innkeeper's voice cuts through, angry and commanding, and things quiet down marginally. But the noise never stops completely. The fire crackles and pops. Dogs bark occasionally. Someone's playing that pipe again, slowly, tunelessly, possibly just entertaining themselves in the sleepless hours. The building itself is noisy. Wind whistles through gaps in the walls and roof. The timbers creak and settle as temperature changes throughout the night. Something, maybe a loose shutter, maybe a piece of roof, is banging irregularly in the wind, a percussive punctuation to everything else. Rain starts at some point, pattering on the thatch above you, and within minutes you feel cold drops coming through weak spots in the roof. People shift away from the leaks, crowding together more tightly, creating new conflicts over space. There's a scream suddenly sharp, terrified, quickly muffled. Your heart is pounding, every sense alert, trying to determine what happened. Nightmare? Attack? Something else? The room stirs, people muttering, someone calling out, "What was that?" in slurred, sleepy tones. No explanation comes. The room gradually settles again, but you're wide awake now, adrenaline humming, hand on your knife, listening intently for any sign of danger. This happens twice more during the night. Sudden noises that spike panic and then fade into uncertainty. Medieval nights are full of sounds that could mean violence or could mean nothing. That crash downstairs, fight or accident. Those urgent footsteps outside, someone running from danger or toward it. The human imagination, operating on fear and exhaustion in the darkness, fills unknowns with threats that may or may not exist. You can hear the night watch calling out the hours as they patrol the town, if you're in or near a settlement large enough to have a watch. 3 o'clock and all's well, though the pronunciation is different enough that you have to work to understand it. Watchmen are part security, part timekeepers, walking circuits and calling out to let everyone know that someone's maintaining order, or at least attempting to. Historians still argue whether medieval town watches were effective security or just theatrical performance of security. But from inside this inn, hearing that distant voice, there's something marginally reassuring about knowing someone's awake and armed out there. The pre-dawn hours are somehow the worst. You've been lying here for what feels like weeks, drifting in and out of something that's not quite sleep, more like exhausted semi-consciousness. Your body aches from the hard surface and awkward positions. Your head throbs from smoke exposure and dehydration. Your skin itches from flea bites that you're trying not to scratch because scratching just makes them worse and possibly introduces infection. You need to use the bathroom again, but the thought of navigating to the privy in complete darkness is more than you can handle, so you hold it, adding bladder pressure to your catalog of discomforts. Other people are awake too. You can tell by breathing patterns, by small movements, by the quality of stillness that's different from sleep. The friar is praying softly, murmuring in Latin, working through his devotions. Someone else is weeping quietly, whether from physical pain or emotional distress you can't tell. The dying man's breathing has changed, becoming more labored and irregular, and you realize you might actually witness his death before morning comes. The sounds from outside change as dawn approaches. Birds start calling, crows first, harsh and loud, then smaller birds joining in. A rooster crows from somewhere nearby, then another answers from farther away, establishing territorial claims in avian communication. Dogs bark more frequently. You hear the innkeeper or his wife starting the day, footsteps on the stairs, the scrape of wood as the fire is stirred and fed new fuel. Light begins filtering in through the gaps in the roof and walls. Not sunrise yet, just the pre-dawn grayness that turns everything into vague shapes and shadows. You can see your fellow sleepers more clearly now, and they look as exhausted and miserable as you feel. Eyes are red-rimmed from smoke and sleeplessness. Hair is wild, nobody's brushing or styling in any meaningful way. Clothes are rumpled and stained with new additions to existing dirt. The platform starts to stir as people wake or admit they've been awake. There's groaning, coughing, spitting, and all the unlovely sounds of humans returning to consciousness after a terrible night. Someone needs to vomit and doesn't make it outside, adding new smells to the environment. The chamber pots are being used with that particular sound of liquid hitting ceramic that carries clearly in the morning quiet, completely unashamed, because this is just how mornings work in medieval inns. You've survived the night, barely. You're exhausted rather than rested. Your body hurts in new and creative ways, and you've been exposed to enough diseases to keep medieval doctors busy for weeks. But you're alive, your belongings are still with you, and dawn is breaking. The night sounds are fading, replaced by morning sounds, and you're about to face the challenge of actually leaving this place, which comes with its own unique medieval complications. Morning in a medieval roadside inn is less a fresh start and more a continuation of the previous night's misery, now visible in full daylight. You're climbing down from the sleeping platform, joints stiff, muscles aching, and your first real look at your fellow travelers in proper light is sobering. Everyone looks worse than they did last night. Eyes puffy and bloodshot, skin pale or flushed depending on their particular health issues. Clothing more disheveled than you realized was possible. That romantic notion of medieval life being simple and natural dies hard when confronted with the reality of dozens of unwashed people who've been marinating in their own filth for 12 hours. The first order of business is attempting some minimal personal hygiene, and this is where you discover that washing up in a medieval inn is a generous description of what's actually available. There's a basin downstairs, a large wooden bowl with water that's theoretically for washing. The water is cold, obviously, because heating water requires fuel and labor, and nobody's doing that for casual traveler cleanliness. It's also communal, meaning dozens of people are going to wash their hands and faces in the same water without it being changed between uses. You watch as people take turns splashing this increasingly murky water on their faces, rubbing at their eyes, maybe running wet hands through their hair. No soap, remember, that's still a luxury item. Some people have brought small cloths for washing personal items they carry with them, but most just use their hands. The water gets progressively dirtier as person after person uses it, and by the time it's your turn, you're dipping your hands into what's essentially a soup of other people's dirt, sleep crud, and facial oils. You splash some on your face anyway because the alternative is not washing at all, and somehow the psychological benefit of feeling water on your skin outweighs the reality of what that water contains. There's no mirror, or if there is one, it's a polished metal disc that shows vague shapes at best. Medieval people aren't obsessed with their appearance the way modern people are, partly because they have no good way to see themselves. You can't check if you have food in your teeth or if your hair is sticking up oddly. You just have to trust that you look approximately acceptable by medieval standards, which are blessedly low. If you're not actively bleeding or covered in visible filth, you're doing fine. The next challenge is gathering your belongings and making sure everything you came in with is still in your possession. You check your pack methodically: clothing, any food supplies you brought, tools, and most importantly, your money. The coin purse is still there, still heavy, which means you've beaten the odds. Theft is so common in medieval inns that successfully departing with all your possessions is worth celebrating. You see others doing similar inventories, and one man is loudly complaining that he's missing a knife. The innkeeper shrugs with complete indifference. What did he expect? This is a roadside inn, not a secured vault. Settling your account with the innkeeper is your next obstacle, and this is where medieval business practices really shine in their arbitrariness. You paid last night, yes, but there are always additional charges. Did you drink extra ale? That's more money. Did you request specific food beyond the standard pottage? More money. Did you cause any damage, create any problems, or exist in a way the innkeeper found mildly inconvenient? You guessed it, more money. The pricing is completely at the innkeeper's discretion, and arguing is possible but risky. You watch a merchant trying to dispute charges, claiming he was overcharged for stabling his horse. The innkeeper is unmoved, pointing out that horses require feed, water, and space, all of which cost him resources. The merchant's arguments about fair pricing and reasonable rates fall on deaf ears because there's no regulatory body enforcing consumer protections. The innkeeper charges what he can get away with, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to sleep in a ditch next time. Eventually the merchant pays, fuming but pragmatic, because causing a scene might mean the innkeeper refuses him service in the future, and this might be the only inn on this stretch of road. Some travelers are leaving without paying at all, sneaking out the back while the innkeeper is distracted with other guests. This is a constant battle, innkeepers trying to extract payment from people who are actively looking for ways to avoid paying. It's why many inns require payment up front. But even then, people try to sneak food, drink more than they paid for, or damage property and disappear before consequences arrive. The innkeeper's wife is chasing someone down right now, a young man who apparently tried to leave with a blanket that wasn't his. She catches him in the yard. There's a brief scuffle, and he surrenders the blanket with a sheepish expression that suggests this wasn't his first attempt at petty theft. Breakfast is available for additional cost, and it's basically the same as dinner, pottage from the same pot, which has been simmering all night with new ingredients added to stretch it. Bread if you're lucky, ale if you pay. Most travelers are eating their own food supplies instead: hard bread, dried meat, cheese that's aging beyond recognition. You decide to skip the inn breakfast and save your remaining coins for actual necessities on the road. Your stomach isn't thrilled with this decision, but your wallet is relieved. The privy is busier in the morning than at any other time, with a line of desperate travelers waiting their turn. You join the queue, shifting from foot to foot, trying not to think about how badly you need to go. The wait is excruciating, and when you finally get inside, the pit has definitely filled overnight. The smell has evolved into something transcendent, beyond mere odor, into a physical presence that makes your eyes water instantly. You do what you need to do as quickly as humanly possible and escape back into fresh air with profound relief. You're repacking your belongings, trying to organize for the day's walking, when you notice the sick man from last night. He's still lying on the sleeping platform, unmoving, and nobody's paying attention to him. You watch for a moment and realize with cold certainty that he's dead. His chest isn't moving. His skin has taken on that waxy quality that bodies get shortly after death. He died sometime in the night or early morning, and everyone's just stepping around him like he's furniture. The innkeeper is informed, and his response is practical rather than emotional. The body needs to be moved, local authorities need to be notified, the man's possessions need to be searched for identification or next of kin information. There's a routine to this that speaks to how common death is. The innkeeper sends his son to fetch the parish priest and maybe the bailiff, depending on whether there's any suspicion of foul play. The body will be wrapped and buried in the local churchyard, probably in an unmarked grave because nobody knows who he was or where he came from. He was just a traveler who happened to die here, and medieval record-keeping being what it is, he'll simply disappear from history. This casual relationship with death is jarring. Nobody's crying or even looking particularly sad. The pilgrims cross themselves and mutter prayers, more from habit than emotion. The merchants glance over, assess that it's not someone they know, and go back to their own preparations. Life continues because it has to. Death is so common that individual deaths, especially of strangers, don't carry the weight they would in modern times. You process this, trying to reconcile your emotional response with the practical indifference around you, and you start to understand how medieval people managed to function in a world where death was constantly present. Outside, the stable area is chaotic with travelers preparing to leave. Horses are being saddled, pack animals loaded with goods, carts inspected for damage from the previous day's travel. The stable boys are working quickly, expecting tips for their service, feeding, watering, and watching these animals overnight. The wealthy merchant tips generously, ensuring good treatment for his valuable horse. Poorer travelers tip minimally or not at all, which the stable boys accept with expressions that suggest they'll remember this next time. Your own departure preparations are simpler because you're walking. No horse, no cart, just your pack and your feet. You check your boots, which are showing serious wear. Medieval footwear is leather, hand-stitched, and expensive to replace. Your boots have already developed new holes despite your attempts to patch them. Walking 30 miles a day on medieval roads destroys footwear faster than you can repair it, and cobbler services are expensive when you can find them. Some travelers wrap their feet in cloth for additional cushioning or protection, which helps marginally but also makes you look desperately poor. You're planning your route for the day, trying to remember how far the next settlement is, where the next inn might be located, whether there are any dangerous sections of road ahead. Other travelers are having similar conversations, sharing information about bandits spotted on certain routes, bridges that are out, roads that have turned to impassable mud after recent rains. This informal intelligence network is crucial. There's no AAA, no GPS, no reliable maps for most travelers. You rely on word of mouth, local knowledge, and educated guessing. The pilgrims are organizing their departure, assigning roles, who carries what, who leads, who keeps watch. They're inviting others to join them for mutual protection, and several independent travelers are accepting. Travel groups form and dissolve organically based on shared destinations and perceived safety benefits. You consider joining them, weighing the advantages of group travel against the slower pace and shared decision-making. Eventually, you decide to travel with them for at least part of the day, because wolves and bandits are real threats and there's safety in numbers. The innkeeper is standing in the doorway watching everyone leave, calculating his profits from the night, already preparing for the next wave of travelers who'll arrive before evening. His wife is inside cleaning, and we're using cleaning very loosely here, meaning she's probably sweeping some of the worst debris into corners and maybe replacing the most obviously disgusting sections of floor rushes. The actual deep cleaning that would meet modern health standards isn't happening. She's just doing damage control, making the space functional enough for the next round of guests who'll have similarly low expectations. You're finally ready to leave, pack secured, bladder empty, somewhat fed if not satisfied, and still alive despite the odds. You take one last look at this inn that's been your shelter for the past 14 hours. The crooked walls, the sagging roof, the smoke-stained timbers, the absolutely criminal privy out back. By all objective measures, this was a horrible experience. Uncomfortable, unsanitary, dangerous, and expensive. And yet, you survived. You had shelter from the elements, food in your stomach, and ale that was probably safer than water. By medieval standards, this was a successful night at an inn. You step onto the road, joining the stream of other travelers heading toward Canterbury or London or wherever their business takes them. The morning air is cold but clean compared to the inn's interior. Your lungs appreciate breathing smoke-free air even if the rest of your body is still complaining about every other aspect of the past night. You're walking now, settling into the rhythm that will carry you through the day, and you're already thinking about where you'll sleep tonight. Another inn, almost certainly, because the alternative is worse. And this is the reality of medieval travel. You move from one uncomfortable shelter to another, grateful for basic survival, and you pay through the nose for the privilege. So why did anyone tolerate these conditions? Why did medieval society develop and maintain institutions that were simultaneously essential and absolutely horrible? The answer reveals something fundamental about human desperation, social organization, and the vast gulf between medieval and modern life. Understanding why inns existed, and why people used them despite everything we've just experienced, tells us more about medieval society than a dozen academic texts ever could. Let's start with the obvious. You need inns because travel is mandatory, not optional. Modern people travel mostly for pleasure, vacations, visiting family, seeing new places because we want to. Medieval people travel because they have no choice. Merchants must travel to conduct trade, moving goods between markets and fairs across regions and countries. Pilgrims travel to fulfill religious obligations, complete penance, or seek miraculous cures at distant shrines. Laborers travel seeking work when their local economy collapses. Messengers travel carrying important correspondence for nobles, merchants, or church officials. Soldiers and mercenaries travel toward conflicts or away from disbanded armies. People fleeing prosecution, debt, or scandal travel to start over somewhere new. The medieval economy requires movement. Goods don't transport themselves. Information doesn't travel faster than a horse can carry it. Face-to-face negotiations are necessary for major business transactions because written contracts are vulnerable to forgery and enforcement is difficult across jurisdictions. You can't just email your business partner or hop on a video call. If you need to finalize a wool sale with a merchant in the next county, you physically travel there, spend days or weeks negotiating, then travel home. Trade fairs happen seasonally in specific locations, and if you want to participate, you travel to them regardless of weather, road conditions, or personal inconvenience. Religious obligations drive enormous amounts of travel. Pilgrimage isn't a luxury activity for medieval Christians. It's a spiritual necessity undertaken for specific purposes. You might pilgrimage to fulfill a vow made during illness or danger. You might be ordered to pilgrimage as penance for serious sins. You might pilgrimage seeking miraculous healing for yourself or a family member. The major shrines, Jerusalem, Rome, Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, attract thousands of pilgrims annually, and reaching them requires weeks or months of travel with all the associated costs and dangers. Minor shrines and local holy sites create additional travel within regions. The Church actively encourages pilgrimage as a demonstration of faith, and the social pressure to complete important pilgrimages is substantial. Legal obligations force travel too. If you're summoned to court, either as a defendant, witness, or juror, you must appear or face penalties. Medieval legal systems require physical presence. You can't phone in your testimony or send a written statement. Court sessions happen in specific locations on specific dates, and everyone involved has to get there somehow. Royal or noble service requires travel. If your lord summons you for military service, administrative duties, or to attend his household, you go. Refusing is breach of feudal obligations with serious consequences including loss of lands, imprisonment, or worse. Economic migrations happen constantly as people chase opportunities or flee problems. A bad harvest in one region sends laborers seeking work in areas with better crops. The wool trade's fluctuations create booms and busts that displace entire communities. When the Black Death killed up to half of Europe's population in the 14th century, it created weird economic effects. Labor shortages in some areas, abandoned lands in others, opportunities for survivors to negotiate better wages or claim vacant properties. People traveled to exploit these opportunities, moving from overpopulated areas to places desperate for workers. Given all this necessary travel, society needed infrastructure to support it, and inns evolved to fill that need. The Roman Empire had built an impressive road network with regular way stations, but by the medieval period, most of that system had collapsed. Medieval kingdoms and localities tried to maintain roads. It was legally required in many jurisdictions, with landowners responsible for roads through their property, but the results were inconsistent. Some roads were well maintained, others were impassable half the year. What emerged was a patchwork of accommodation options ranging from monasteries offering hospitality to commercial inns like the one you just survived. Monastic hospitality was theoretically free, offered as Christian charity, but it had limitations. Monasteries could only house so many guests. They had rules about who they'd accept, and they weren't located conveniently along every travel route. Many monasteries preferred housing pilgrims over merchants, religious travelers over secular ones. They might turn away women traveling alone due to concerns about propriety. They definitely turned away anyone who looked disreputable, carried weapons, or seemed likely to cause problems. Monastic hospitality was wonderful if you qualified, but many travelers didn't. This created a market opportunity that secular innkeepers exploited. If you could provide shelter, food, and ale near a well-traveled road, you could charge travelers who had no alternatives. The economics are straightforward. Travelers arrive exhausted and desperate. Their bargaining position is terrible, and they'll pay whatever you ask rather than sleep outside. There's essentially no competition in many locations because establishing an inn requires capital for building, equipment, and supplies, plus connections to suppliers for food and ale, plus the labor to run the operation. In many areas, there might be only one inn within a day's travel, giving that innkeeper monopoly power over pricing. Medieval business regulation varies by location but is generally minimal by modern standards. Some towns set maximum prices for ale or bread, and the official ale taster we mentioned earlier would inspect quality and potentially fine sellers of substandard products. But enforcement is inconsistent, penalties are often light, and innkeepers learn to work within or around regulations. If the legal maximum for ale is 1 penny per gallon, you can charge the legal price but short pour the gallons, or you can claim your ale is premium quality that justifies higher pricing, or you can simply add enough fees and extras that the total cost exceeds what regulations intended. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were generally competitive and fair or whether they were dominated by monopolies and exploitation. Evidence suggests both conditions existed in different places and times. Urban markets with multiple inns probably offered better value and treatment than rural areas with single establishments. Inns near wealthy areas or catering to upscale travelers probably maintained higher standards than roadside establishments serving common travelers. The inn you just experienced represents the lower end of the market, minimal facilities, maximum profit extraction, taking advantage of travelers with no alternatives. But even terrible inns served crucial social functions beyond just shelter. They were information hubs where travelers from different regions shared news, gossip, and intelligence. In a world without newspapers, radio, or internet, inns were where you learned about political developments, economic conditions, road hazards, and opportunities in other areas. That conversation you overheard about the bridge being out, That's valuable information that might save you days of travel or keep you from dangerous situations. The merchant discussing wool prices was sharing market intelligence that other traders could use to adjust their strategies. Inns facilitated business transactions and networking. Merchants meeting at inns could negotiate deals, form partnerships, or arrange complex transactions involving multiple parties. The common room functioned as an informal trading floor where economic relationships formed and dissolved. You might arrive as independent travelers and leave as business partners after discovering complementary interests over ale. The enforced proximity created opportunities for connections that wouldn't happen otherwise. Inns also provided security, limited though it was. Yes, theft happened constantly, but sleeping in an inn was still safer than sleeping outdoors where bandits, wolves, and weather posed greater threats. The presence of multiple travelers meant potential witnesses to crimes, which deterred some criminal activity. The innkeeper, despite being primarily profit-motivated, had some incentive to maintain order because dead or robbed guests might attract legal attention and definitely hurt his reputation. A really bad inn where guests regularly got murdered would eventually face consequences from local authorities or simply lose business as word spread. The social mixing that happened at inns was unusual in medieval society, which was otherwise quite stratified. Normally, peasants and nobles didn't interact much. They lived in separate worlds with separate concerns. But at inns, class boundaries softened slightly. Everyone needed shelter, everyone ate similar food, everyone used the same privy. This created temporary communities where information and perspectives crossed class lines in ways they rarely did elsewhere. A noble's servant might share sleeping space with a merchant who could share market intelligence valuable to his master. A wealthy widow might hear about distant family from a traveling friar who'd passed through her ancestral region. Cultural transmission happened at inns. Songs, stories, jokes, and ideas spread along with travelers. That pipe player you heard wasn't just entertaining himself. He was part of a network of traveling musicians carrying tunes across regions. The stories told in common rooms spread news, propaganda, religious teachings, and entertainment. Literacy was limited, but oral culture was rich, and inns were nodes in the networks that carried that culture across medieval Europe. When new ideas emerged, religious reforms, political movements, technological innovations, they often spread through traveler conversations at establishments like these. The inn system also reflects medieval attitudes toward necessity versus comfort. Modern people expect comfort as a baseline and complain when it's absent. Medieval people understood that survival was the primary goal. Comfort was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Those terrible sleeping conditions you endured? That was normal life for most people. Medieval peasants slept on straw in their homes, shared beds with family members and sometimes livestock, lived without privacy, and accepted parasites as inevitable. The inn was uncomfortable by modern standards, but not dramatically worse than many people's daily existence. This explains why inns didn't improve much over centuries despite obvious problems. There was no competitive pressure to enhance quality because travelers had no alternatives and no leverage. Complaints were ignored because what were you going to do? Sleep outside and die? The people running inns came from the same society as their guests. They genuinely didn't see the conditions as unacceptably bad because they lived in similar conditions themselves. The innkeeper's family probably slept in quarters not much better than what they offered travelers. Everyone had fleas, everyone lived with smoke, everyone used primitive toilet facilities. The inn wasn't failing to meet standards, it was meeting the actual standards of medieval life, which were just really low. Economic constraints also limited improvements. Investing in better facilities, proper chimneys, separate rooms, better beds, improved sanitation, cost money that would take years to recover through marginally higher prices that travelers might not pay. Why build a chimney when you can just let smoke escape through a hole? Why invest in separate sleeping rooms when communal platforms work fine? Why improve the privy when nobody's complaining about the current one? From the innkeeper's perspective, he's providing exactly what the market requires at the price point that maximizes his profit. Anything beyond that is wasting resources. The legal and social framework also supported in culture rather than challenging it. No consumer protection laws required minimum standards. No health departments inspected facilities. No licensing boards could revoke operating permits for poor conditions. Inns existed in a largely unregulated space where the only real constraint was whether travelers chose to stay there. And since travelers often had no choice, market forces didn't drive improvements. There were occasional regulations. Towns might require inns to provide honest measures of ale, or prohibit them from harboring known criminals, but enforcement was inconsistent and penalties were rarely severe enough to change behavior. What's fascinating is that despite everything, the inn system worked. Not well by modern standards, but functionally within medieval constraints. Merchants completed their trade routes, pilgrims reached their shrines, messages got delivered, soldiers made it to battlefields, and society continued functioning with travel as an integral component. The inns were uncomfortable, unsanitary, dangerous, and exploitative, but they provided the minimum infrastructure necessary to enable the travel that medieval economy and society required. This tells us something profound about human adaptability and desperation. People will tolerate genuinely terrible conditions if the alternative is worse and no better options exist. You survived that night at the inn because you had to, and medieval travelers did the same for centuries because their lives and livelihoods depended on mobility despite the costs. They understood the risks: disease, theft, discomfort, expense, and traveled anyway because not traveling meant missing opportunities, failing obligations, or facing worse problems at home. The inn system also reveals medieval priorities in sharp relief. Safety, health, and comfort ranked below economic necessity and religious obligation. A modern society would see those conditions and mandate improvements immediately. Medieval society saw the same conditions and shrugged because maintaining travel infrastructure, however crude, mattered more than individual traveler comfort. The collective benefit of enabling travel outweighed concerns about individual suffering during that travel. Understanding this helps us grasp how different medieval life truly was. It's not just that they lacked modern technology, they had completely different expectations about what life should provide. Security, comfort, and health as rights or baseline expectations didn't exist as concepts. You survived as best you could with available resources, you accepted hardship as normal, and you were grateful for whatever protection from the worst outcomes you could arrange. The roadside inn, terrible as it was, represented protection from worse fates. It was better than dying of exposure, better than being eaten by wolves, better than bleeding out after a bandit attack on an empty road. So when you think about that miserable night, the smoke, the straw, the snoring, the privy, the danger, the expense, remember that medieval people experienced all that and considered it an acceptable trade-off. Not pleasant, not desirable, but acceptable given the alternatives. They survived and continued traveling because they had to, because their world required mobility to function, and because humans are remarkably resilient when necessity demands it. The inn system existed because medieval society needed it to exist, and it persisted in its terrible state because that was sufficient for the world it served. Better would have been nice, but sufficient was enough to keep people moving, keep commerce flowing, and keep medieval society lurching forward through the centuries, one uncomfortable night at a time. Now you understand what it really meant to travel in medieval times. Not the romantic adventure of period dramas, but the grinding reality of exhaustion, discomfort, danger, and exploitation, all endured out of necessity by millions of people who had no choice but to keep moving forward. Their resilience is remarkable. Their suffering was real, and their world, however foreign to us, functioned on these terms for centuries, shaped by constraints we've largely escaped and hardships we can barely imagine. That's the real history of the Medieval Roadside Inn. Not charming, not quaint, but deeply, honestly human. Your journey's nearly over now, and I hope you found some strange comfort in how much worse things could be. Tonight, when you climb into your clean bed with its soft sheets, maybe you'll think about those medieval travelers settling into straw and feeling grateful for exactly the same reason. When you flip on a light switch or turn on running water, you're accessing luxuries that would seem like pure magic to everyone you met at that inn. They endured, they survived, and somehow they made it work, one miserable night at a time. Sleep well, friend. Your pillow is softer than you realized. Your room is quieter than you knew. And the bathroom, with all its modern miracles, is waiting just down the hall. No rats, no shared privy, no holes in the roof. By medieval standards, you're living in paradise. By any standards, you've survived a history lesson that makes the present feel pretty good. Rest easy now. You've earned it, even if you never had to walk a single medieval mile.